Chapter 3. Tommy's morning began with a rough start. He woke up, and Henry, his cow plushie, had fallen on the floor, and he always felt guilty when that happened. And then, he didn't end up slipping and cracking his head open in the shower, which would have saved him from having to go to school. Even though he was practically immortal, he used that term in full confidence, especially as that car that hit him last year should have murdered him. Since only the myths could kill him, it was the thought that counted. Speaking of myths, he hadn't made any progress of what myth he currently had either. His headspace was too focused on the past, which was probably due to how this foster family had too many resemblances to his other myths. He could never fight off the thoughts of his past lives or their myths when he was in the shower. The water tormented him, acting as if it didn't remind him of his disfigured and marked skin with every wet drop. There was no moment where the scars, the memories, of Theseus, Icarus, and Orpheus could be forgotten. Although he didn't experience the pain of the wounds, or even the healing process, as he was reborn with them attached to his body, he couldn't ignore the discomfort the scars brought. He wrapped a towel around his waist and hoped the rest of the day would go okay. And because the gods were never on his side, the second he opened the bathroom door, it all went to shit. As soon as Tommy walked into the corridor, Techno just had to exit his room. The once timid air around him sharpened and prickled against his skin. Vulnerability encased his exposed body. The scrutinizing stare from Techno didn't help the weighted fear held against his chest. He felt as if he were on display. An exhibit in a museum. See the cursed child, don't poke the glass. At that moment, nothing stopped Techno from knowing every flaw his skin flaunted. Instead of resorting to swears or phrases to gain control of the situation, so the awaiting panic attack wouldn't hit him in front of a man he had met 2 days prior, Tommy ran into his room, closing the door behind him. It took everything in him not to crumble into his bedsheets and stay there until the end of time, which so happened to be in a couple of months for him. The desire to bury and delude himself, to neglect the truth of reality, overwhelmed him, just like it did in his last life, when his own head deceived him to the point where he remained oblivious to the weight of the dead body lying in his arms and forgot about her. His face reddened and his eyes burned. He shouldn't do that again. The smell of a rotting corpse and the cracking of dried blood on his arms, forcing him back into reality, did more damage than the original loss. He couldn't do that again. With the harrowing sound of knocking coming from his door, Tommy accepted defeat. Bracing himself, Tommy wrapped a blanket around his shoulders and opened the door. A disgruntled Techno stood in front of him. "How do?" Tommy said. His voice cracked, but he'd rather pretend that did not happen. "This wasn't on your file." Knowing what Techno was referring to, Tommy bit on the inside of his cheek. He remembered Linda telling them about his scars, but when you hear that, you don't think of, oh, a 3rd-degree burn on your shoulder, slashes across your stomach that look like a wild pack of dogs ripped you to pieces, and a massive skid mark down your back. Truth be told, Linda didn't know the extent of his scars. He kept them hidden, but obviously not hidden enough. "Don't tell Phil." "Why not?" Techno asked. Tommy glared at him. "He'll ask questions that I don't want to answer." "What if I have questions?" Tommy stayed silent and let the sickness pool in his stomach. He didn't want to do this. "All right, dickhead. You can ask one question, but then you can't tell anyone about this." There was no logic in even offering Techno a question, but the gleam in Techno's eyes told him that he wouldn't drop this. "What happened to your torso?" "Orpheus. Why the fuck did he have to ask about Orpheus? Why not the burns on his shoulders? Why not Icarus? Why did it have to be that? Tommy didn't know what to say. If he explained how Dio died, how he actually died, then Techno would know this didn't happen during this century. After all, how do you say that your friend died of a disease that had been declared eradicated since the 1980s? Just thinking about it made the claw marks on his torso sting. My friend was dying. I tried everything to save him. Everything. Bloodletting, quackery, even fucking variolation. But my lack of faith and impatience killed him instead. It was impossible to forget the disappointed pity he received from the wise woman in his village when he told her he didn't take her advice, that he didn't just wait and treat the symptoms of smallpox, rather than doing what the doctors told the rich. They couldn't even give Dio a funeral. That doesn't explain why you look like you survived a lycanthrope attack. It wasn't his fault that his myth decided to get torn to shit by Dionysus followers years after Eurydice died. That L was taken by him. Then your question should have been more specific. Now, can you fuck off and let me get changed in peace? Techno looked more disgruntled than before, dissatisfied with an answer that was as honest as Tommy could give him. His stare dipped down to Tommy's exposed wrist, his tattoo. Why do you have a tattoo of Zagreus? Tommy flinched. Dream's real name always did this to him. The reminder that Dream was a god and chose to torture him, making him a special case, a pastime to laugh at. As if a Greek god, son of Zeus and Persephone, who was millennium years old, couldn't find a source of entertainment elsewhere. Dream's cackles that engulfed the empty void plagued Tommy's ears. The same cackles the god released at a Tommy who had just experienced death for the first time, begged for an explanation, pleaded for his big brother to come and save him from this vile man. Tears fell down his face, and all Dream said in response was that this was a punishment, the consequences of what he did to his patron. I said fuck off. He slammed the door shut and let his agony pour through him. Thankfully, breakfast didn't involve having any more of Tommy's past being brought up. He sat at the head of the table, stabbing his fried egg with his fork as the others talked amongst themselves. He appreciated Techno pretending as if nothing had happened, even though his method was just ignoring Tommy's general existence at the table. Techno stopped staring at Wilbur. Phil spoke louder than he did before, alerting Tommy of their conversation. It's Monday, Techno said, and I'm waiting. Realization sprung onto Phil's face, followed by annoyance. Of course. Get on with it, Will. You don't sound excited about my weekly update, Wilbur stated. He scowled at his family, but the amused glint in his eyes sabotaged his expression. Now, Tommy, as you are new here, this will be your first update. Treasure it. And it is something you need to look forward to each week. Get on with it, Phil repeated. So, my Spotify clout is growing. That is not what Tommy expected to hear. Most of my playlists have gotten more likes, with the highest being 27 on my Songs You Play When the Boys TM Get in the Car playlist. Wilbur went on more about the Spotify algorithm and his weirdly named playlists than Tommy would have liked. What the fuck was an incel anyway? He didn't even know Spotify had an algorithm, and he wasn't so sure it could be exploited for playlist exposure. That's nice to hear, Will, Phil said, with his voice conveying the exact opposite. On to more important stuff, though. Tommy, I printed out your school timetable. He'd prefer Spotify talk to school bullshit. Phil handed him a sheet of paper across the table, and Tommy squinted at what he read. Why have I got physical education lessons? I thought they stopped in year 11. I thought that was one of your chosen subjects, like music. Tommy shook his head. Haha, you have to do PE. Wilbur tried to smother his delight at Tommy's suffering with his hand. Die. Oh, I didn't realize we were at the death threats point in our bond. Shut the fuck up, Tommy quipped back, stabbing his egg again. It's just running around a field for an hour. Why is it even a qualification? Techno asked. Wilbur continued grinning at Tommy. You need to know about lactic acid and shit. When I die from exercise and take lactic acid, Tommy ignored Wilbur's interjection that lactic acid wasn't a drug. I am going to place all the blame on Phil Kraft. I will get Linda to sue you. Dad, no, fix it. I don't want to see Linda Smith ever again. I'd rather do PE than Spanish, to be honest, Tommy said, noticing the absence of the lesson in his timetable. Then you can't blame me when you die from exercises, Phil replied, looking smug as Tommy gripped harder on his fork. The audacity of this old man. No me gusta. Stop speaking broken Spanish and hurry up with your food. We're leaving soon, Wilbur said, as he stood up to put his plate in the sink. We? Yes, we. I have school too. Tommy was confused. No offense to Wilbur. Full offense, actually, but he looked like he was in his middle 20s, similar to Techno's age, if not younger. You're still in secondary school? I'm a year 13 resit. Let me live. So he was 18 or 19. Either way, old as fuck. It was Tommy's turn to laugh at Wilbur's suffering. Avoiding a hit to the head, Tommy ducked and quickly ate the rest of his breakfast. After that horrific car ride, Tommy now understood how Wilbur failed his driving test 5 times. Still feeling the effects of being in a car with a man who shouted out a range of numbered points every time he could have hit someone, Tommy followed Wilbur through the school gates. That building is the entrance to the main school, and reception looks like the drive-through window for McDonald's, easy to find. Wilbur grabbed his lanyard from his bag and hung it around his neck. Now, you go on and have an embarrassing and socially awkward first day at school, and I'll see you back here at 3 o'clock. Wilbur walked off and greeted another sixth form student, an average height, but tiny when stood next to Wilbur, girl with dyed pink hair. What the fuck was up with this town and pink hair? Tommy had gone to 2 schools in this life, and they were far better than the ones in the 1970s, and the attempt of an education he had in France. Secondary schools were established in larger cities, but fuck learning about modern sciences in a time when they believed bad air caused disease rather than bacteria. Despite that, Tommy didn't like these schools. He didn't appreciate being barged into in corridors and called pussyo. Regardless, Tommy proceeded to the reception that was apparently a knockoff McDonald's window. He humbly disagreed with Wilbur on this comparison, since reception instead looked like those run-down Subway shops placed at petrol stations. The only difference to an actual petrol station Subway was that there usually wasn't a boy who looked like a year 7. If it wasn't for the red badge on his blazer indicating he was in year 11, Tommy never would have known. In there. McDonald's, sure, but not Subway. Tommy wondered during the car ride here why this school had colored badges for different years. But it wouldn't surprise him if this kid was the sole reason why. He looked 12, and not 15 or 16. It didn't help that the guy wore his school uniform like a preschooler either. The fucking buttons weren't even buttoned up properly. His tie was inside out, and there was more mud on his trousers than fabric. Tommy closed the reception door behind him, alerting the guy that he was there. A look of pain came across the boy's face, almost wishing that social interaction didn't exist, and maybe that Tommy didn't exist either. You must be Tommy. I'm Tubbo, the boy said, and the name weirdly fit him. I was assigned to show you around the school on your first day. How many good behavior points are you getting for that shit? Tommy asked. The reluctance of this entire ordeal was obvious from the other boy. A lot, Tubbo said. I'm saving up for an Amazon gift card. Why? If it's the school's money, my parents will let me buy this stainless steel knife set. What the fuck? Now, Tommy didn't judge on appearances, but this guy looked like he'd prefer to buy stuffed animals online and not fucking weapons. You could buy anything and you want that? They have rainbow titanium coating, it's worth it. Perplexed by this conversation, Tommy just nodded at him. Maybe if they were red coating, he'd understand the commitment. There was an old woman behind the reception counter, but she ignored him. That, or her old age affected her ears and she genuinely didn't know he was there. Either way, Tommy's first introduction to this school was a short kid covered in mud with a liking for rainbow knives. With this town, he didn't expect anything less. "Can I look at your timetable before I take you to form?" Tommy gave it to him, and Tubbo looked up at him with disgust. "You willingly chose PE?" Not wanting to relive the teasing he received earlier from Wilbur, Tommy took it with stride. "I have a god complex." "I have no idea what that means." "Me neither." Tommy beamed at the boy's bewilderment. "Anyway, where's form?" Tubbo's commentary on all the things they walked past whilst on the way to form was educational, to say the least. He learned to avoid drinking from the water fountains, unless you wanted cholera, and to not sit on the school heaters unless you want beef with the year 9s, who have nowhere else to go at break or lunch. Also, Tubbo shared music with him, so he wouldn't be alone for that class. Most interestingly, though, was when the two walked into their form room, and a random girl said to Tubbo, "Good morning, bee-boy." Apparently, if you mention that you like bees once in year 8, that shit happens. Tubbo didn't even know the girl. His first lesson was history, and fortunately, Tubbo had that class as well. No need for awkward introductions to other students then. He'd just latch onto this one guy for the entire day. However, the liveliness he had from his conversations with Tubbo in form died the minute he entered his history classroom. Flags that meant death, false freedom, and blood to him were paraded on the display boards upon the walls, with shitty lesson work plastered below it. The same colors that once brought a newfound nation together and fueled misplaced patriotism were reduced to a classroom accessory. He sat down next to Tubbo, trying to calm the shaking in his legs. His right hand gripped onto his tattooed wrist, wishing that this wasn't what Dream meant by making this life exciting. The tightness in his throat and heat against his neck worsened as Tubbo pushed his textbook between them. The title mocked him. Everything became muffled as the words sunk in. The L'Manberg Revolution and Greater S&P Wars, 1521 to 1537. He faintly registered Tubbo talking to him, and that 5, maybe even 10 minutes had passed. But nothing mattered. Nothing mattered but the glaring textbook placed in front of him. The book had been opened to a page, exposing his watering eyes to more text about his first life, about Theseus. As he recognized the content on the page, his world collapsed. A scanned picture of his notebook, of the same message he read before going to sleep, laid on the page. It was almost untranslatable, sabotaged by time. Yet he could recognize his own brother's handwriting anywhere. He read the caption at the top, and the bile rising up his throat tasted bitter. W. Soot's only recorded message. If they had printed a stupid note his brother had written, which had no historical meaning, then what else did they print? There were diary entries he made whilst he was there. There was personal shit, meant for no one else's eyes, when he was desperate for someone to just listen to him, to care about how he felt, and his conflict when someone finally did care, only for that to end badly as well. He should have known from the beginning that his notebook wasn't normal. He didn't know where it came from, but it didn't leave his side. Even the days where he woke up drowning with his notebook in his bag, the pages never ruined. Well, it must have lost its magical properties after he died. He turned to a random page, and his own written words were enough. It's never my time to die. Tommy raised his hand. I need to go to the bathroom. The teacher nodded at him, said something about allowing it since he was new, but he didn't care. He moved out of the chair, trying to compose the trembling in his legs and the pounding in his head. He just needed to get out of that room, away from those words. His deathly grip on the bathroom sink tightened as tears pricked in his eyes. A part of him wished for the sink to break into pieces, to cut at his skin and shatter in his hands, anything to distract him from the memories of where he'd climb his stone towers and stand over the edge, letting the harsh gusts of wind decide his fate. His tattoo stung, and he clawed at it, hoping that Dream felt his pain by extension. As his back slid down the wall, Tommy held his head in his hands, and a sob echoed in the room. He could never escape it. Escape him, escape his past. He didn't know how much time had passed, but it was enough that the teacher would notice his absence. He sat back down, avoiding eye contact with anyone who noticed his puffy face and red nose. Tubbo tapped on his shoulder. "You okay, man?" He wanted to scoff at that question. He wanted to say the truth, the words at the tip of his tongue. "No, you have to revise and write essays about the same events that ripped apart my family, murdered my brother, destroyed any friendships and ounces of trust I had left, and killed me. I am not fucking okay." But he didn't say that. He couldn't. He sucked up all the self-pity he had and attempted to smile at the boy next to him. "Yeah, I'm fine. Just a bit nervous first day and all." "Understandable. If you're worried about not making any friends or stuff like that, I think you're pretty chill." Tommy nodded, and the forced smile on his face felt a bit more real. Tommy could finally swallow without tasting bitterness in his throat when break time came around. The previous sobs that wrecked his throat elapsed as he enjoyed Tubbo's company in the school canteen. "So do you hang out with anyone else?" Tommy asked, as he picked at the sandwich Phil made for him. "Yeah, this guy called Ronbu, but he's not in today," Tubbo said. "He was playing an emotional game until 5 in the morning. I woke up to him calling me whilst he cried over some characters called Chloe and Max. I don't know." Tommy snorted, recognizing the game. "What a pussy crying over Life is Strange. He wants me to play it with him, but I think that's just his excuse to see me cry." A person in the line for food caught his eye, stopping him from commenting on Tubbo's strange friend. Wilbur, noticing him, flipped Tommy off. So Tommy did the most polite and mature thing he could have done, and did the same back. "You know Wilbur?" He looked at Tubbo and paused. Tubbo didn't seem like the assholes who would take the piss out of foster kids. "I'm staying with him for a while." "You're related to Phil's in Minecraft? Holy shit!" Tommy didn't know where his sudden excitement came from. "What? No, I'm being fostered by Phil Craft. Is that your nickname for him or something?" "Dude." Tubbo put down his sandwich for dramatic value. "He created Minecraft." "No fucking way. You didn't know this?" Tommy shook his head. "You are telling me everything you know about the Craft family." His shitty morning and introduction to history had soon been forgotten, as Tubbo gave him the brightest grin he could muster and began his rant. His phone buzzed in his pocket as he said goodbye to Tubbo at the end of the school day. Family chat. Wilbur. Image attached. Stop speaking to Tubso and hurry up. Technoblade. Stop taking pictures of children at school. Wilbur. Shut the fuck up. Rolling his eyes at the messages, Tommy reached Wilbur at the gate and followed him to his car. Wilbur put on his music with the auxiliary, and surprisingly, it wasn't that bad. Nothing beat bardcore medieval covers, though. As subtly as possible, Tommy wrote down some of the lyrics in his notebook so he could find the song later. The thought crossed his mind that this would be a permanent mark in his notebook. Something that, no matter the amount of crossing out, would still be there. He didn't mind that. You're fitting in better than I thought you would on the first day, Wilbur said, as he narrowly avoided running over one of the Year 7s who crossed the road without looking. Techno didn't speak a word to anyone for a week just to establish a mysterious persona. Did it work? Yeah, they were shit scared of him. Tommy shared the feeling. He beat up some kids, which solidified the entire thing. Well, I found a tubbo, he said, with a proud smile. You sure did. Nice choice. He's like his sister. He won't let you go now. Who's his sister? Nikki. Pink hair, German accent, very throwable. Wilbur did not expand on that. When they got home, the biggest mystery of the craft house was solved. With Phil, paperwork and laptop in his hands, on the second dining table that Tommy hadn't eaten on yet, it all made sense. That table was for work-related business. It did confirm, though, to Tommy's dislike, that the crafts had some Tory in them. Phil looked up from his laptop and greeted them. How was school? Tommy ignored his question and channeled all the built-up emotions he'd had all day. You created Minecraft! You named a game after yourself? How egotistical and selfish are you? And you didn't even tell me. Would you have preferred Cave Game? Phil asked, not bothered by the loudness Tommy created. I'll take it back. Be as selfish as your heart desires, Mr. Minecraft. Wilbur threw his bag on the sofa, and Tommy noticed his calm attitude had changed since he exited the car. Where's Technoblade? I need to show him something. Even his voice had changed. He picked up another shift at the library. What do you need to show him anyway? Phil asked. Nothing. I'll be in the shed. Without another word, Wilbur stalked out of the room and left a bewildered Phil behind. Not liking the silence, Tommy sat down opposite him. I made a friend today. He had no idea why he said that. Except he did, but that didn't mean he approved of it. He didn't like the inkling of hurt and muffled confusion on Phil's face. Fuck, what was this house doing to him? He'd been there for not even 3 whole days, and he was already succumbing to the pressure of human emotion. That's good. The hurt on Phil's face dissipated. Did you end up dying in PE? Nope, didn't have it today. We should both be thankful for that. That better not be a threat. Anyway, I have an idea for funny Minecraft mods. No. Phil disagreed a bit too soon for Tommy's liking. What if... Tommy started, not deterred. Every time you killed a mob, you morphed into them. We are not doing this. You're right about that, because you're the one doing it. He couldn't ignore the lightness in his chest as Phil laughed at his suggestions. After at least an hour of bothering Phil, Tommy was about to leave to get changed out of his shit school uniform, but Phil stopped him. Before you go, Techno asked me to give you this. Tommy frowned as Phil grabbed something from underneath the table. He shoved a book with one of those bows you stick on the top of wrapped presents into Tommy's hands. It was a child's introduction to Greek mythology book, with a note attached to it saying, Figured you liked Greek mythology because of the tattoo. Techno. His frown deepened at the book. The gift. Don't ask, I don't get the context either, Phil said. Why did Techno give this to him? Maybe it was a peace offering because of this morning, but he preferred a twit longer and an apology video for that, since those were funnier. He appreciated the thought, even though he hated Greek mythology. This was a whole new level of irony.